Well, hello, you guys, and welcome back to Mind Your Money. I am Bree Callis, author and entrepreneur, and we're back for our weekly series on money. And today is all about the numbers because the numbers don't lie. So I hope you have your handy dandy notebook with you along with a pen or a paper to write with. Let's jump right into it. We're going to talk about three main areas tonight when it comes to knowing those numbers. The biggest one is going to be your income. Do you know how much you make weekly? Do you know how much you make monthly? Do you know how much you make yearly? Now, that might be very easy if you're on salary, you have no type of interest or dividend-bearing investments, you have no real estate investments, nothing but your base salary. If that's all that you have, it's very easy to figure that out. You can see that on your pay stubs, add those numbers up to get what your yearly income would be. But if you're like many of us that's in this community, we're entrepreneurs, so we may have our daytime job. We also might have real estate investments. We may have interest or dividend or interest-bearing investments along with a side gig. If you're a freelancer, if you're a consultant, if you're in direct sales, or if you have multiple direct sales or multiple business, have you taken the time to figure out what that number is after taxes have been deducted from it? What is your net income? So that's the first part about knowing your numbers. So this week, I want you to focus on what is your real income. I want you to calculate it. Take some time, bring all those statements together. If your income fluctuates, especially if you're at like 100% commission, you can look at last year's tax statements. If you're suspecting that business is going to increase, say, by 10%, add 10% of what those earnings are to kind of give yourself a gauge on what those numbers are. Because the first things first is you have to know where your cash flow stands. Cash flow meaning what's coming in, but also when it comes to cash flow, you have to know what's going out. So what do I mean by what's going out? When it comes to cash flow, that's going to be your variable expenses as well as your fixed cost expenses. And I want to kind of go into fixed expenses this week. Next week, we'll dive in how to really calculate those variable expenses, but fixed expenses are really easy, especially if you pay things electronically or you get some type of statement that shows what your usage is or what your cost may be. So what's the difference between variable and fixed? Variable is going to be your things that could be like your gas. It could be if you have some type of your recreational budgets. If you go, we're not spending too much time in the movies right now because of the pandemic and things, but all those things that can fluctuate or those impulse buys, those are variable expenses that you might incur. So when we talk about fixed expenses, what do those items look like? Number one is going to be your mortgage or your rent. Number two is going to be your cable, your TV, and internet. Usually we know what those expenses cost month in and month out. That's a fixed number, so we can calculate that down. So I want you to bring your journal out. The first thing you're going to do again is focus on what's coming in, and then we're going to break that down even further and focus on what those fixed expenses are. Mortgage, rent, number one, cable, TV, internet, especially a lot of us have those bundled. Now, put that down as a line item for a fixed expense. You're going to have, if you have any car loans or any lease payments, those are generally a fixed amount. Put that down. If you have any childcare expenses, if you're still paying for daycare, whether it's on a weekly, bi-weekly, put that total number that you're spending on that item each month as a fixed expense. If there's a set number that you spent on groceries. So now, when our family was 6 people here living at home, I used to allocate about $200 a week on groceries, incidentals, household goods. So I knew that was a fixed expense. Now that our family size has decreased here at home, I'm around $125 a week. So that's a set aside of $400 I'm sorry, $500 a month versus the $800 that we used to spend. So that is something that you can set up as a fixed expense, which is your groceries. Also, if you pay any health insurance, if you have it coming out of your daytime pay stub, that's already will be allocated with your net income. But if you pay for your health insurance outside of it and it's a fixed expense, go ahead and put that down. Life insurance payments, it's going to be a fixed expense. Make sure you write that number down. If you have your cell phone bill, hopefully your cell phone is on a fixed amount. Most plans have done away with these minutes and all these things where our bills used to be variable. We don't know if this month we're getting a $200 bill and then next month we get a $100 bill. So most bills, and when it comes to our cell phone usage is now fixed. So you can write that down. If you have student loan payments that's set at a fixed amount, put that down on your list as well for your fixed expenses. Also, any type of transportation expenses. So we have our tow tags. So we allocate, say, about $80 a month based on the two vehicles going back and forth for our toll usage. So that's about $80. We can anticipate sometimes it's only $40, but we have it usually set at $80 as a fixed expense. Your utility bills. Sometimes our utility bills can fluctuate. I know some individuals are on fixed amounts. I know through this pandemic, some utilities companies have allowed their customers to be set at a fixed amount until this cycle comes back to a more stable state, I should say. So if your utilities, if you can allocate $75 a month, say that your water, trash, sewer, put that down. If you have a fixed amount on your gas or your electrical, my electrical varies. I know what my peak number is and what generally my low number is. So I set that as a fixed expense as well. Also, don't forget, a lot of us have subscriptions, whether you subscribe to YouTube, whether you have Amazon Prime subscription, if you have a Netflix, Hulu, all these additional subscriptions, but it's a fixed amount. You know what that is month in and month out. Go ahead and list that down as a fixed expense. All right. Remember, we're going to tackle variable expenses next month, but we're focusing on the fixed expense when it comes to our cash flow each month. First things first, we had to identify what our income was. Now we're figuring out what those fixed expenses are. Hey, Vicky, thanks for joining us live, love. So we talked about some of those things that would be listed on there as a fixed expense, and that's what we want to know. That's part 2 of what's coming in, what's going out, because it's important that we know the numbers, because the numbers don't lie. Especially if you're an entrepreneur, you need to know your numbers. If you even have a side gig, you need to know your numbers. If you anticipate so many sales or services to go out each month, you need to know those numbers, because it's the bottom line to what we have coming in as our net income. So number 1, what's coming in, what's the income. Number 2 is the fixed expenses. Here's the third thing that we're going to discuss. It's going to talk about job security. We all know that we're right now in an economic climate that's up and down, up and down. Mostly, we can say that the pandemic had a huge effect, but we were already headed towards a recession. So we knew that there was going to be some shifts in careers. There was going to be some shift moving from entrepreneurship back to the workforce, or leaving the workforce and going to full-time entrepreneurship, or if you've had a plan to do either or. Now is a good time for us to start looking at. There was a point in time where an individual could count on going to work for a specific employer 10 plus years. That economic climate is over. It's not unheard of to hear that someone has changed different careers 3-4 times nowadays. So, and it's not a bad thing. Sometimes we just change. We have different likes. We have things that, that industry has slowed down. It's no longer an interest to you. So don't feel bad if you feel like you got to hang up one hat to put on a new hat. But there's a couple of questions that you can begin to think about when you're looking at job security or whether this environment is still for me. Here's number one question I want you to ask yourself. Are you happy in your current position? And here, when I say, are you happy in your current position, I'm speaking on, does this particular work bring me joy? Joy in some format, because even as an entrepreneur, you're not going to like every facet of your business. But the majority of what I'm doing, I enjoy it. So that's what I want you to look at when you're reassessing what you're currently doing, or if there's possibly a chance for a change. Am I happy in this current position now? Number two, is your boss happy with you? How was your last few performance evaluations? Because one thing that you can identify is a disgruntled employee. You can identify it with the way they carry themselves on the jobs. You can see how they interact with their employees. You can see how they interact with management. Are they fussy? Are they late? Have they gotten really lax? So performance evaluations will usually be an indicator, but remember, performance evaluations are usually done on an annual basis. Most corporate establishments, because they do it closely around whether they're going to gauge if you're going to be getting a raise or some type of performance bonus that year. But sometimes my last company that I worked with, we used to have them like quarterly. There was like a quarterly check-in with my manager, and I absolutely loved that type of management style, because it was a time for me to be open. It was a time for her to be open. We can talk about where I'm having trouble, what I'm starting to find irritating. It was just a very open door policy, but you can learn a lot from management from that, and you can learn a lot from yourself. So that's the second question when it comes to identifying this job or this career, or if it's time to transition, is my boss happy with me? Number three, has your company or industry had any recent layoffs? We know right now, in the last 7 months, there was industries that were so strong for such a long time that they saw an upheaval of layoffs and unexpected layoffs. But because you don't have a workforce, or your actual industry was highly impacted by this pandemic or by a recession, this might be the prime time for you to start listening. You know, sometimes you have to put your social ears on when you're looking and you're gauging the internet, whether it's your platforms, LinkedIn, whatever it is that you think. What is the buzz saying about your particular industry? Is this industry headed to a layoff, or is this something that's going to happen? Here's another thing when you're thinking about that. Is your particular company or industry seeing a lot of mergers take place? Because that's also an indication. A lot of times when acquisitions and mergers happen, there comes a layoff with that. They're either bringing on their staff, or they're releasing their staff and some of the old staff, and they're just keeping a certain subset of employees. So you want to look at that when it comes to listening for the buzz on what's going on in my industry. How healthy is your job market? Hey, Renette, thanks for jumping in. How healthy is the job market? When was the last time, if you still work for an employer, when was the last time that you went and Googled your particular position? So if you're in project management, if you're in safety, if you're a laborer, if you're an office manager, if you're HR, when was the last time you took the time to actually see what the job market is asking for? Is this position still hot in case I decide to transition? Because that's going to be important, because remember, first we establish what's coming in. If I decide that I want to transition, I need to know the numbers, because if I need to leave this and go somewhere else, whether I'm staying in the same line of work, but I might be taking those skills and moving to a different industry, I need to know what type of pay is the market even asking for this need. So we're focusing on some of these questions to ask when you're reevaluating where you stand when it comes to job security. Number 6 question I want you guys to ask yourself: if you lost your job tomorrow, or if your business shut down tomorrow, what position financially would you be in? Do you have 3 to 6 months of expenses to hold you over? That was the one thing my family did. So my breadwinner, my husband, he lost his job in March. I left my job in January. We anticipated me leaving, but we just didn't anticipate him losing his job. But one thing we learned, because his type of industry has those waves and peaks, we learned a long time ago, when we came into some financial obstacles, that we needed to have at least 6 months set aside in case he lost his job, I lost my job, or if we both lost our job. And lo and behold, we were at that crossroad where those 6 months of expenses needed to be tapped into, because that's where we were at. So that's what I want you to think about. If you lost your job tomorrow, or if your business shut down, what kind of financial position are you in? And number 7, this is the last thing when it comes to reassessing that whole job security, business security. Are you grateful for your profession? Or is it time for you to move on? Sometimes we get so comfortable because we just know something that it's really hard for us to transition into something new. When I left my job back in January, I was transitioning into a whole new career. When it came to my business, my safety business, I left oil. I'm still dabbling in the oil and gas, but I came from an accounting background. I also came from commercial property management. That going into this industrial and going into this construction industry was completely different for me, but it was something that I needed. I was completely bored in my last profession, that I needed a shift. So I want you to think about that when it comes to your profession. Are you grateful for it, or do you find yourself continuing complaining? Because it might be time for you to start looking at new avenues. And sometimes we have to scale into that thing. That's why I love side gigs. That's why I like side business, hustles, whatever you want to call them. I love those because it gives us an opportunity to play around with our other skills. And sometimes our skills need to be amplified by doing something else. It's not to say that you're going to leave your full-time gig, but now I have options and I have something else that I'm really enjoying. So that's all I wanted you guys to think about. You've got to know the numbers, because the numbers don't lie. This week, focus, number 1, on what's coming in. Write it down. Everything from all your freelance work, everything from your rental investments, your interest and dividend bearing investments, all those things, I need you to write it down. Number 2, you need to write down all your fixed expenses each month. I gave you an example of a list of things that you can start to calculate and put that down. And then the third phase of that, reassess that career that you're in. Make sure it's still aligning with your goals, your dreams. Are you still grateful? Are you still in that space that you feel that you can serve someone else? I hope you guys enjoyed this week. Next week, we're going to talk all about variable expenses. We've done so much over the last, I think this is like our 5th video in this series. Might even be the 6th video. The first 4 or 5, we focused on getting things in order, because now we're about to get down and dirty. But we first got to know the numbers. So thanks again for watching me. If you have not subscribed, be sure to subscribe. Leave a comment in the down there in the comments. Let me know what's your biggest takeaway. Do you know your numbers? Is that something that you've been scared to tackle just because it's easier to just brush things aside? I'd like to know. And thanks again for joining me. See you next time.